Hello, and welcome to a journey into a gentle night of ancient myths. Before we begin our tale, make sure you are warm and comfortable. Close your eyes if you like, and allow the day's worries to drift away like clouds parting in a calm sky. This is your time to rest, to let go, and to imagine. Tonight, we will travel together to a distant land and a distant time, lulled by the soft melodies of an old Greek story. In this peaceful space, feel the weight of your body sink into your bed, as if the earth itself is cradling you. Take a slow, deep breath in, and then gently exhale, releasing any tension. With each breath, you become a little more relaxed, a little more at ease. Your heartbeat finds a slower rhythm, echoing like a distant drum in a tranquil, faraway temple. Notice how your arms and legs feel pleasantly heavy, sinking deeper into the mattress. Allow any tightness in your shoulders or neck to soften, your forehead and jaw to relax. The air around you is quiet and still, and you feel completely safe. There is nothing you need to do right now except be here in this moment. Any thoughts or worries can float by, unattended, as you give yourself permission to rest. Feel a gentle warmth in the air, as if the night itself is wrapping you in a soft embrace. You are here, gently transitioning to a state of peaceful ease. Now picture in your mind a warm summer night in ancient Greece. Overhead, a velvet sky is sprinkled with countless stars, twinkling softly like tiny lanterns. A silvery crescent moon casts its gentle light over rolling hills and the calm sea. You can hear the faint sound of waves lapping against a distant shore. On the breeze, there's the scent of salt and wildflowers, and the air is soft and balmy on your skin. Under this starry sky, all of Greece lies in a hush of midnight. By the Aegean Sea, a soft wind whispers through olive groves and tall cypress trees. The world of ancient times slowly comes alive in your imagination, peaceful and dreamlike. Let us walk into that world now, stepping softly along a moonlit path, leaving behind the present and entering the realm of myth and legend. We are about to follow the footsteps of a hero named Theseus, and the gentle thread of his story will guide us, leading us safely through a legendary maze and back out again. Now our tale of Theseus and the Labyrinth begins. In a time long ago, beyond the reach of memory, there was a mighty king named Minos who ruled the beautiful island of Crete. King Minos lived in a magnificent palace with halls of stone and pillars painted in rich colors. From his palace on the hill, he could gaze out over his kingdom, from the gentle green valleys and vineyards to the wide blue sea beyond. Crete was a prosperous land, favored by the sun and the gods, but beneath the surface of its splendor lay a dark and secret shadow. This secret was hidden deep in a winding maze, a labyrinth so intricate that no one who entered it without a guide could ever find the way out. King Minos had a wife, Queen Pasiphae, and together they had children and wealth and the favor of the gods, at least for a time. But fate wove a strange thread for King Minos' family. It was whispered that Minos once defied the god Poseidon, and in return, the gods placed a curse upon his household. From this curse, a creature was born to Queen Pasiphae, a child unlike any other. He was called the Minotaur, a being half man and half bull, enormous and strong. The infant Minotaur had the body of a human, but the head of a ferocious bull, with large sharp horns and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. As the creature grew, it became clear that it was wild and could not live among men. The Minotaur hungered for things no normal creature should, with a fierce appetite that frightened even King Minos. Ashamed and alarmed, King Minos resolved to hide this unnatural son away, where it could harm no one and where few would ever see it. He called upon the greatest inventor of the age, Daedalus, a man of wisdom and skill, to build a special prison for the Minotaur. Obeying the king's command, Daedalus constructed a massive labyrinth within the depths beneath the palace. This labyrinth was a maze of endless corridors and twisting passages that doubled back on themselves in bewildering loops. Its stone walls were smooth and pale, lit only by the occasional flicker of torches, and the air inside was cool and still. Daedalus built it so cunningly that once inside, it was nearly impossible to find the way out again without a thread to retrace one's steps. At the heart of this maze, in a great central chamber, the Minotaur was kept, forever wandering the twisting paths or curling up in dark corners to sleep. There in the shadows, the Minotaur lived out its days, hidden from the world. Yet the Minotaur's existence was not peaceful. Being half beast, it knew only hunger and loneliness. Sometimes at night, its eerie roars echoed out from the depths of the labyrinth, rumbling up through the ground and out across the starlit fields. The people of Crete could hear those distant cries, and they trembled, thankful that the maze's walls kept the monster at bay. Only King Minos would occasionally descend to the edge of the labyrinth, peering into the darkness at his secret offspring with a mix of fear and cold pride. Minos didn't love the creature, but it was still of his blood, born of his queen. He would not kill it. Instead, he confined it where none could threaten his kingdom's safety or challenge his authority. However, King Minos' life had other sorrows. He had a son named Androgeus, a valiant prince who once journeyed far across the sea to Athens. In Athens, Androgeus met an untimely death under mysterious and bitter circumstances. Some say he was murdered out of jealousy because he excelled in the athletic games and contests there, outshining the young men of Athens. When news of Androgeus' death reached Crete, King Minos was heartbroken and enraged. Grief turned to anger, and he blamed the Athenians for his son's demise. In his fury, Minos set sail with his fleet and armies to wage war on Athens and demand justice for his lost heir. The war that Minos waged against Athens was brief but bitter. The Athenians fought bravely, but Minos' forces were powerful and his wrath implacable. Fearing the mighty king of Crete and the favor of the gods that seemed to sail with him, Athens soon found itself at his mercy. To appease King Minos' anger and prevent further bloodshed, the city of Athens agreed to a cruel tribute. Thus began a grim custom. Every several years, Athens would send a ship to Crete, bearing 7 of its bravest young men and 7 of its fairest maidens. These youths, in the very bloom of life, were offered up to King Minos and to the Minotaur in the Labyrinth. They were to be sacrificed, sent into the winding maze as prey for the hungry monster within. It was a fate as dark as any night, and it hung over Athens like a sorrowful cloud. None of those sent as tribute had ever returned. Once they stepped through the labyrinth's mouth, it was as if the darkness swallowed them completely. The people of Athens mourned this terrible price deeply. Each cycle of the tribute plunged the city into despair as families said tearful farewells to their beloved children, never knowing if perhaps the gods might intervene, or if their sons and daughters were marching towards certain doom. The black-sailed ship that bore them away would depart Athens in mourning, and when it returned at all, came back empty. This cruelty went on for years. Though the Athenians resented Minos for it, they felt powerless against the will of the Cretan king and the monster he harbored. And so it went until the time came when Athens was called to send the tribute for the 3rd time. By then, the tale of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth was whispered across all of Greece, passed from frightened lips in taverns and around hearth fires. The thought of yet another 14 young souls lost to the monster filled Athens with dread. In homes throughout the city, families spent sleepless nights in tearful prayer, hoping the lottery would not call their beloved children to this doom. A heavy gloom hung over Athens as fathers and mothers clutched their sons and daughters close, imagining the terrible fate that might befall them. It was at this time that a young prince named Theseus, son of King Aegeus of Athens, stepped forward with courage in his heart. Theseus had grown up hearing tales of brave heroes and monstrous foes. He was strong and bold, with clear eyes and a kind spirit, and he loved his city deeply. He had already proven his courage during his journey to Athens as a young man, defeating bandits and wild beasts that threatened the innocent. When he learned of the horrific tribute that Athens paid to Crete, his heart burned with resolve. Theseus could not bear the thought of more innocent youths being led like lambs to the slaughter. Though he was still young, he possessed a sense of justice far beyond his years, and he decided that this cycle of terror must end. In his mind, he formed a daring plan. He would go to Crete as one of the 7 young men, enter the Labyrinth, and slay the Minotaur, freeing both Athens and Crete from this nightmare. When Theseus announced his intent to volunteer for the voyage, the people of Athens were astonished. Normally, the youths for the tribute were chosen by lot, but Theseus offered himself before any names could be drawn. The Athenians admired the prince's bravery and found their despair tempered by a new glimmer of hope. Yet many also feared for him. King Aegeus, Theseus's father, was racked with worry at the very thought. Aegeus had only recently recognized Theseus as his son. The prince was the heir and the hope of Athens. The idea of losing him to the Minotaur was almost more than the old king could bear. Late into the nights, Aegeus tried desperately to dissuade Theseus, pleading that surely someone else might take on this deadly task, or that perhaps there was another way. But Theseus was gentle, yet firm in his resolve. He told his father that it was his duty as the prince to protect his people and end their suffering. If he did not go, who would? He could not stand aside and let others face the danger in his stead. Seeing that Theseus's mind was set, King Aegeus reluctantly gave his blessing, though his heart was heavy with fear and sorrow. Together, father and son made preparations for the journey to Crete. The ship that would carry the tributes was readied, a sturdy, black-hulled vessel that had made the voyage twice before. Its sail was black as night, the color of morning, so that all who saw it would know it carried those marked for death. Before Theseus boarded the ship, Aegeus took him aside on the quiet docks under the pre-dawn sky. The old king pressed into Theseus's hands a folded white sail. Aegeus spoke to him with a voice choked by emotion. He gave Theseus the white sail and explained its purpose. If by the gods' grace Theseus survived and triumphed, he must hoist this white sail in place of the black one on the journey home. Every day until then, Aegeus would watch the horizon for the ship's return. If a white sail he saw, he would know his son was alive and victorious. If only the black sail appeared, then his worst fears would be confirmed. Theseus clasped his father's hands and promised that he would remember. He assured the king that he would either return triumphant or not at all. With the first light of dawn glinting on the calm waters of the Aegean, the 14 young Athenians, including Theseus, boarded the ship. They were a solemn company, 7 brave youths and 7 frightened maidens, stepping onto the wooden deck with tears in their eyes. Their families huddled on the shore, watching with grief and the faintest hope. Theseus stood among them with quiet confidence. he offered gentle words of comfort to his companions, urging them to have courage. Though he did not know exactly what awaited them, his presence was steadying, like a rock in a stormy sea. As the ship pushed off from the shore, its sail billowing with the morning breeze, a hush fell over those left behind on the docks. King Aegeus stood upon a high outcrop overlooking the bay, watching with a heavy heart as the black sail grew smaller in the distance. He silently prayed to the gods for his son's safety, vowing to keep his vigil on that cliff until the ship returned. The people of Athens slowly dispersed, their hopes sailing away with that vessel, sailing toward Crete, toward the unknown. The journey across the Aegean Sea was long, carrying them far from home, but the weather was gentle and kind. Day after day, the ship glided over calm waves that shimmered under the bright sun. The wind was soft but steady, filling the sail and pushing them forward. Sometimes dolphins surfaced to swim alongside the boat, their sleek bodies arcing playfully through the water, as if escorting the Athenians on their quest, bringing a brief smile to careworn faces. At first, the young passengers kept to themselves, wrapped in their own fears and sorrows. Some wept quietly for their families. Others stared out over the endless waters, lost in anxious thoughts of what was to come. But Theseus did not allow despair to fester. He moved among them, speaking in gentle tones, sharing stories of hope, and reminding them that they were not alone. In the evenings, when the sun melted into the sea and the sky turned rose and gold, the mood on the ship grew calm and almost dreamlike. The Athenian youths would gather on the deck under the open sky. With the worst of their fears spent, they listened as Theseus spoke of brighter things, of the green hills of Athens they would see again, of the gentle gods who watch over the just, and of the possibility that even a terrible fate could be challenged by bravery. His voice was low and reassuring, blending with the rhythmic wash of waves against the hull. As twilight deepened, one by one, they found moments of rest, some even drifting into light sleep, curled up on coils of rope or against the wooden railings. Above them, an endless array of stars appeared, lighting the ship's way like a trail of tiny lamps across the sky. Theseus himself stayed awake long into the night, keeping watch. Under the silvery glow of the moon, he often stood at the prow of the ship, gazing ahead toward the horizon where Crete waited unseen. He thought of what lay ahead, of the dark labyrinth and the creature within it. He whispered silent prayers to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and to Poseidon, lord of the sea, who some said was his divine father, asking for strength and guidance. A cool breeze ruffled his hair as he closed his eyes for a moment and imagined a favorable outcome. The Minotaur defeated, and his companions safely returning home. In those gentle night hours, with the scent of salt air and the soothing sound of the sea, even the great task before him felt somehow woven into the natural order of things, as if the gods themselves supported his resolve. After several days and nights, the outline of Crete emerged on the horizon one morning, a dark blue shape rising from the bright sea. As the ship drew closer, the travelers could make out rugged cliffs and green hills, and the gleam of white buildings atop a distant promontory. It was the palace of Knossos, King Minos' seat of power, sprawling and ancient even then, with its walls and courtyards that had witnessed so many years of myth and history. The very sight of it made the Athenian youths fall silent with awe and apprehension. The ship entered the harbor of Crete as the sun climbed toward its zenith, shining down upon a bustling port. Even here, a somber mood prevailed, for the arrival of Athenian tributes was no cause for joy. Cretan guards in bronze armor and crested helmets were waiting by the docks. They guided the ship into a berth and ordered Theseus and his companions to disembark. One by one, the 14 youths stepped onto Cretan soil, their hearts thumping softly in their chests. The air was warm and dry, carrying the scents of brine and distant cypress groves. Fishermen and townsfolk paused in their daily tasks to watch with pity or curiosity as the young Athenians were led in a somber procession toward the palace of King Minos. Under the bright sky, the palace of Minos loomed larger as they approached. It was a grand complex of buildings with red columns and frescoes of dancing dolphins and proud bulls adorning the walls. Yet for all its beauty, an uneasy quiet hung over the place today. The footfalls of the prisoners and their escorts echoed in open courtyards of stone. Finally, Theseus and the others were brought before King Minos himself, in a great hall lined with pillars. King Minos sat upon a high seat, draped in rich robes. He was no longer young, but his presence was formidable, his eyes sharp and his face stern. At his side stood Queen Pasiphae, her gaze distant and unreadable. Near them were some of their other children, including Princess Ariadne and her younger sister Phaedra. Ariadne, a maiden of graceful form with long dark hair, watched the Athenians with a troubled expression, her heart already going out to them. She knew too well what fate awaited these youths if nothing changed. She lowered her eyes sadly, unable to meet their fearful gazes for long. Yet as she glanced at Theseus, standing proud and calm, even in chains, Ariadne felt a pang in her chest. She had witnessed 2 previous groups of Athenian captives brought before her father, but never had one of them faced King Minos with such quiet courage. Something about Theseus, the resolve in his face, the kindness in the way he subtly supported one of the trembling younger boys beside him, moved her deeply. Already, a seed of resolve was planted in her heart, though she did not yet know what she would do. The king's voice broke the silence, echoing through the hall. He addressed the Athenians in a tone that was formal and cold, reminding all present why they were here. This was the price Athens paid for the death of his son. He declared, every 9 years, or at whatever interval fate demanded, the flower of Athenian youth must be sent here and lost to the labyrinth. His words hung in the air like a bitter chill. Theseus stepped forward from the line of captives and lifted his head to speak. In a steady, respectful voice, he introduced himself not merely as one of the tributes, but as the son of King Aegeus of Athens. A ripple of surprise went through the court at this bold revelation. A prince among the victims. Minos raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Theseus went on to state that he had come with the intent to end this cycle of bloodshed. He announced that he meant to face the Minotaur and slay it, thereby freeing both Athens and Crete from this horror. A stunned silence followed Theseus's proclamation. Then some of the courtiers murmured, and even the stern lips of King Minos curled in a slight, grim smile. Minos regarded the young man before him, noting the determination in Theseus's clear eyes and the strength in his bearing. It had been many years since anyone had spoken so confidently in the face of the Minotaur's terror. The king's voice, low and measured, responded. He told Theseus that if by some miracle he could kill the Minotaur, then Crete would no longer demand tribute, and all the surviving youths might indeed go free, and nothing more would ever be said of this matter. But, he warned, many brave souls had entered the labyrinth before, and none had ever emerged. Furthermore, as was the custom, Theseus would not be allowed to carry any weapon into the maze. He and the others would go in at dawn, empty-handed, with only their courage. Minos's terms were meant to extinguish hope, but Theseus stood unflinching. He inclined his head in acceptance. In his heart, he had already anticipated such obstacles. He had faith that somehow an opportunity would arise to fulfill his mission. Watching silently, Princess Ariadne felt her heart quicken at Theseus's bravery. He seemed so resolute and noble, very different from the trembling youths previously brought before her father. Where others wept or begged, Theseus radiated calm. Ariadne found herself silently praying that this young hero might indeed succeed. That night, by King Minos's orders, Theseus and the other Athenian captives were taken to a dungeon deep beneath the palace. Through a heavy wooden door bound with iron, they were pushed into a large, dimly lit cell. The floor was cold flagstone. Only a tiny window high in the wall let in a sliver of moonlight. When the guards locked the door with a resounding thud, despair settled over the youths inside. Some began to cry softly in the darkness, while others huddled together, whispering comfort. They all knew that when morning came, one among them, perhaps more, would be led into the labyrinth, likely never to return. The weight of that knowledge lay on them like a stone. Theseus, however, remained composed. He moved among his fellow captives, offering quiet words of reassurance. He urged them to hold on to hope just a little longer, promising that he would do everything in his power to save them. Exhausted by their journey and weighed down by sorrow, one by one, the other youths eventually drifted into restless sleep on the straw strewn about the cell floor. All except Theseus. He stayed awake, leaning against the wall and peering up at that narrow slice of moon through the window. His mind was focused, turning over plans, trying to recall any detail he had heard of the labyrinth's layout, and thinking of how he might fight the beast barehanded if need be. In the still of the night, he imagined he could feel the presence of the monster somewhere below, as if a faint vibration or a distant, heavy breath traveled through the stones under his feet. Though another might have been overwhelmed by fear at that thought, Theseus kept his fear at bay by concentrating on his purpose and trusting that fate and the gods would guide him when the time came. High above, in another part of the palace, Princess Ariadne also could not sleep. She slipped out of her bed and quietly stepped onto a terrace bathed in moonlight. From there, she could see part of the courtyard below, and beyond it, the dark outline of the labyrinth's entrance, attached to the palace like a great stone puzzle box. The night was so still that Ariadne imagined she could hear the faint echoes of weeping from the dungeons far below. Each muffled cry from the unfortunate youths cut through her heart like a blade of sorrow. Ariadne's heart was troubled. She thought of the handsome young prince she had seen in the throne room, and how bravely he had offered himself. An urgent compassion stirred within her. This was not the first time she had witnessed the arrival of doomed youths from Athens. It was the third such occasion, and she remembered too well the grief that followed each one. But never before had one of them stood up to her father or declared an intention to fight the Minotaur. In Theseus's eyes, she had seen something new, hope, and that hope now took root in her own chest. She felt suddenly that she could not simply stand by and watch him die. Ariadne was no warrior, but she possessed a gentle courage and a quick mind. She knew the labyrinth better than most in the palace, for as a child she had listened to Daedalus, the architect, speak of its wonders and secrets. Daedalus still resided at the palace as a craftsman, and Ariadne respected and trusted him. It was said that he himself regretted building the labyrinth now that it was used for such a cruel purpose. Steeling herself, Ariadne decided to seek Daedalus's counsel. Moving silently through the torchlit corridors of the palace, Ariadne made her way to Daedalus's workshop, a small chamber cluttered with tools and scrolls of plans. She found the old inventor hunched over a desk, unable to sleep himself, perhaps weighed down by guilt. Startled by the princess's appearance at such a late hour, Daedalus nonetheless listened intently as Ariadne confided her intention to help Theseus. Her voice was earnest and urgent, but kept low, so as not to be overheard by any guards or servants loyal to Minos. Daedalus, whose clever hands had built the maze, knew every twist and turn of the labyrinth's design. He realized that with a bit of help, the brave prince might indeed have a chance to succeed. From a shelf, Daedalus took down a simple ball of strong flaxen cord, a clue of thread. He had prepared it long ago, in hopes that one day it might be used to save lives rather than trap them. Pressing the ball of thread into Ariadne's hands, he quietly explained how Theseus should use it. One end must be fixed at the entrance of the labyrinth, and the rest carried by Theseus as he walked forward. If Theseus managed to defeat the Minotaur, the thread would guide him back out again, preventing him from becoming lost in the endless passages. Daedalus also revealed where a weapon could be obtained, for he knew Theseus would stand little chance against the beast with bare hands alone. In the chamber of a palace guard who was off duty and fast asleep, a sharp sword lay within reach. Ariadne could steal this sword without raising alarm. Armed with this knowledge and these gifts, Ariadne thanked Daedalus sincerely. The old man placed a hand on her head in blessing, perhaps thinking of his own son, Icarus, as he looked upon the brave young princess, and he whispered a final caution for her to be careful. He then watched as Ariadne slipped out into the night, determined and filled with a quiet excitement that chased away her earlier despair. Ariadne enlisted her sister Phaedra's help as well, for Phaedra was equally kind-hearted and was also horrified by the bloodshed caused by the Minotaur. Together, the two princesses moved like shadows through the sleeping palace. They fetched the sword from the guard's chamber exactly as Daedalus had directed, carefully lifting it from beside the snoring guard's side. Then they crept down the winding stair that led to the dungeon, Ariadne carrying a small oil lamp to guide their way, its glow carefully shielded beneath her cloak. Outside the locked dungeon door, the sisters paused. Through the thick wood, they could hear only silence, and perhaps a faint sigh from one of the sleeping captives within. Phaedra held the lamp and the coil of thread, while Ariadne drew out a heavy key she had taken from her father's chambers. Hands trembling slightly, Ariadne fitted the key into the lock. She had stolen it, knowing her father kept a spare for emergencies. Tonight, she used it for mercy. With a soft click, the door unlocked, and Ariadne eased it open with a slow, cautious creak. Ariadne stepped into the dungeon softly, Phaedra right behind her. The faint lamplight fell on the faces of the sleeping youths. They began to stir at the intrusion of light and movement. Theseus, who had been awake and alert, rose swiftly to his feet, ready to defend his companions if this were some threat. But when he saw two slender figures in cloaks rather than armored guards, and recognized Princess Ariadne's kind face, he realized help had come. He approached quietly as Ariadne, through the bars, whispered that she had a plan. With Phaedra's assistance, Ariadne quietly pulled open the heavy door of the cell. The other Athenians woke one by one, bewildered but hopeful at this unexpected turn. Ariadne pressed a finger to her lips, urging them to remain silent. Her heart was pounding, but outwardly she kept a calm determination as she spoke in a hushed voice. She quickly explained to Theseus that there was a way to navigate the labyrinth by means of this ball of thread. She placed the coiled thread into Theseus's hands and then revealed the sword hidden under her cloak. Theseus accepted both gifts, gratitude and resolve, shining in his eyes in the dim light. Leaning in close, Ariadne described what Daedalus had told her. She instructed Theseus to tie one end of the thread securely at the entrance of the labyrinth when he entered. As he moved through the maze, he must let the thread unwind behind him. No matter how many turns and corners he took, the thread would mark the true path back. Once the Minotaur was defeated, he could follow that slender strand back out to safety. She also whispered that the Minotaur often slept deeply during the darkest hours before dawn, after roaming its maze late in the night. This would be the best time to find it drowsy and perhaps catch it off guard. Theseus listened intently to every word, committing the plan to memory. He fastened the end of the thread tightly around his belt so it would not slip from him in combat. Then he took the sword's hilt, feeling the solid weight of the weapon. It was a simple Cretan sword, but very sharp, and in his grip it felt balanced, as if meant for him. He nodded to Ariadne and Phaedra, his expression filled with gratitude and something deeper, a gentle warmth as his eyes met Ariadne's. In that quiet moment, an understanding passed between the young hero and the princess. Without words, he thanked her for this chance at life and promised with his steady gaze that he would not squander the opportunity her bravery had given him. Ariadne then confided to Theseus her wish to flee Crete with him should he succeed. She knew that by helping him, she was betraying her father, and that she could not remain in Crete afterward. Her voice trembled only slightly as she admitted she would gladly leave her home behind if it meant saving him and the others from a cruel fate. Theseus, moved by her bravery and kindness, swore quietly that if he lived through the coming ordeal, he would take Ariadne with him to Athens and treat her with the honor she deserved. He would not forget that without her help, he and his friends would surely perish. Outside, the night was at its deepest. The moon had drifted low toward the horizon, and 1,000,000 stars glimmered in the black sky. It was the hour of stillness, when most of the palace slept, and even the wind was quiet, as if holding its breath. This was the moment Ariadne had planned for. She guided Theseus and the others out of the dungeon as silently as possible. The youths followed, eyes wide but feet light, stepping carefully to avoid noise. Phaedra led the way with a small lamp held low, its glow barely illuminating the ground at their feet. The group made their way through a corridor that opened into the courtyard of the labyrinth. All was silent except for the distant chorus of crickets and the gentle sigh of the breeze through the trees. There stood the entrance to the labyrinth, a great stone doorway built into a mound, flanked by two tall torches that burned with weak, flickering flames. The torches cast long shadows across the ground, their light dancing on the carved stone frame of the entrance. Beyond that threshold lay darkness deeper than night. Theseus stepped forward to the door of the labyrinth. It was a heavy double door, but one side had been left slightly ajar. Perhaps the guards assumed no one would dare enter or exit without permission. A deep, earthy smell wafted out from inside, like ancient dust and cold stone. Theseus felt a cool draft from within, as if the labyrinth itself were breathing softly. He turned to look at Ariadne one last time in reassurance. She managed a small, hopeful smile for him, though her hands were clasped anxiously at her breast. Phaedra stood beside her, holding her sister's arm, equally worried, yet hopeful too. Moving with resolve, Theseus carefully tied the loose end of the ball of thread to the base of one of the torches at the entrance, anchoring his lifeline. He then held the ball of thread in his left hand and the sword in his right. With a final nod to the princesses, he slipped through the narrow gap in the door and entered the labyrinth alone. Ariadne and Phaedra remained outside, right by the doorway, watching the thread unreel slowly from the torch as Theseus ventured farther and farther in. They dared not close the door completely, leaving it just ajar so that the thread would not snag, and so that Theseus could slip back out quickly when needed. Inside the labyrinth, Theseus was enveloped in darkness. The air was markedly cooler and smelled of damp stone and something musky, likely the scent of the beast somewhere in this twisting prison. For a moment, he stood still, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. Only a faint glow came from the doorway behind him, where a sliver of starlight cut in. Ahead, the passages were swallowed in blackness. He allowed his other senses to sharpen, listening intently, smelling, feeling the slight movement of air that indicated an open space or corridor ahead. Somewhere deeper inside, he thought he caught a hint of a sound, a slow, resonant breathing echoing along the corridors. It was so faint that an untrained ear might mistake it for the wind, but Theseus knew it must be the slumbering breath of the Minotaur. Step by careful step, Theseus moved forward into the maze, letting out the thread from the coil as he went. He kept one hand lightly on the left wall, feeling the cool, solid stone to anchor himself. The floor was smooth beneath his sandals. Every few yards, he encountered intersections, one corridor branching into 2 or 3. Following Ariadne's advice and Daedalus's guidance, he chose always the path that seemed to lead downward or toward the direction of the breathing sounds, and he avoided taking any turns that seemed to loop back upward. Nonetheless, the labyrinth was cunning in its design. Some passages led him in circles back to familiar junctions. Others came to sudden dead ends. The walls were uniform and bare, providing no clue or marker, so that each corner looked the same as the last. It was a place meant to confuse the mind and defeat the spirit. In the silent darkness, it was easy to imagine spirits or unseen eyes watching from the black corners. But Theseus kept his mind clear. He paused often to listen for the Minotaur's breathing, and as he progressed, that sound grew ever so slightly louder. Sometimes he heard a snort or a low growl reverberate through the cold stone hallways, and he knew he was drawing nearer to the beast's lair. At one particularly confusing fork, the corridors twisted in a way that momentarily disoriented even Theseus's keen senses. He inadvertently took a wrong turn and felt the slack of the thread tugging him back. Grateful for the lifeline, he retraced his steps to the last junction and then chose a different path, all the while moving as silently as a shadow. As he ventured farther in, the darkness became more complete. He could hardly see his hand in front of his face. At times he simply closed his eyes and relied on touch and hearing, feeling along the walls, taking one careful step at a time. The thread continuously unspooled behind him, a reassuring tether linking him to safety. The labyrinth's oppressive stillness was punctuated only by the distant drip of water from some unseen source and the ever-present sound of the creature's heavy breathing. Theseus's own heartbeat was steady and slow. He kept his fear in check by focusing on each small action. Move forward, listen, follow the faint breaths in the dark. Finally, after what felt like an eternity wandering in the black maze, Theseus sensed he was very close to the heart of the labyrinth. The smell in the air had changed, growing more pungent and beastly. The breathing was now distinct, a guttural snoring sound echoing off the chamber walls just ahead. He reached out and realized he had come into a larger open space. This must be the central chamber of the labyrinth. Though he still could not see clearly, he could feel the space opening around him. The air felt less confined. He paused, barely daring to breathe, and listened. The Minotaur was there, just a short distance away, apparently sleeping. In the gloom, Theseus's eyes began to discern a shape on the ground, a massive, hulking form, darker than the surrounding darkness. It was curled up against a wall. He could make out the outline of broad, muscular shoulders and a great, horned head resting on thick forearms. The Minotaur did indeed seem to be asleep, producing those low, rumbling snores that reverberated in the chamber. Theseus carefully set down the nearly depleted ball of thread by his foot. He had used most of it reaching this point, but still it remained looped around his waist and in his left hand so as not to lose it. He needed his right hand free for the sword. Drawing a slow, deep breath to steady himself, Theseus crept forward, sword raised. His mind was calm, his resolve hardened like steel. In this pivotal moment, he felt almost outside himself, guided by something greater, perhaps the goddess Athena whispering courage into his heart, or Poseidon steadying his arm. He closed the distance between himself and the sleeping monster, each step deliberate and soundless. When he was but an arm's length away, the smell of the creature was overpowering, a stench of sweat, animal fur, and old blood. But Theseus did not flinch. Suddenly, the Minotaur stirred, perhaps sensing a presence even in its sleep. It let out a heavy snort and shifted its massive limbs, its horned head lifting slightly as if on the verge of waking. Realizing that the moment was now or never, Theseus summoned all his strength and courage. In one swift motion, he lunged forward and struck with his sword. The blade found its mark, true and deep. The Minotaur bellowed in pain and surprise, an earth-shaking roar that filled the cavernous labyrinth chamber and spilled out into the hallways beyond. The sound was so loud that it even jostled the sleeping palace above. Ariadne and Phaedra, waiting anxiously at the entrance, heard the roar and clutched each other in fear at the noise reverberating from within the ground. Inside the chamber, the monster was now fully awake and enraged, its eyes gleaming ferociously even in the darkness. It heaved itself to its full height, towering over Theseus, horns nearly scraping the ceiling. Wounded, it swung its bull head side to side, trying to gore its unseen assailant, and its human-like arms lashed out with tremendous force. Theseus ducked and rolled away to avoid the initial charge. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained clear and focused on survival. The beast's roars reverberated like thunder in that enclosed space. The sound threatened to overwhelm the senses, but Theseus kept his wits. In the faint light, he could see the massive outline of the creature lunging, and he sidestepped swiftly, using agility against the Minotaur's brute strength. Theseus dodged another heavy swing of a fist. He managed a second strike with his sword, slashing the creature's flank as it rushed past. The Minotaur howled in rage and pain, swinging its arms blindly in the darkness. One powerful swing caught Theseus's shoulder, knocking him against a wall with bone-rattling force. He gasped at the sudden pain bursting across his shoulder and side, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay focused. The monster lunged again, trying to pin him to the wall, but Theseus was quick. He rolled aside, despite the ache in his body, and regained his footing. Stone dust rained down as the Minotaur's horns gouged the wall where Theseus had just been. The hero realized he needed to end the battle swiftly. His strength, though great, would wane if the fight went on too long, and one lucky blow from the beast could be his end. As the Minotaur charged once more, Theseus made a bold move. He ran directly toward the charging beast, and at the final heartbeat, he dove aside. The Minotaur's momentum carried it forward head first into the solid stone wall. The creature let out a stunned grunt as it collided hard with the unyielding rock and stumbled, momentarily dazed. Seizing the opportunity, Theseus sprang up and thrust his sword once more, this time plunging it into the Minotaur's chest with all his might. The blade pierced true. The beast let out one final, shuddering roar that gradually ebbed into a low groan. It sank to its knees, and for a brief moment, its bull-like eyes met Theseus's in the darkness. In that flicker of time, Theseus felt a solemn pang of pity for the creature, a life born from a curse, confined in darkness and rage, now meeting its end. But the Minotaur's suffering passed quickly. The monster exhaled a last gurgling breath and then fell heavily onto the cold stone floor, stirring up the dust that had settled over the years and over the bones of its many victims. A profound silence followed. Theseus stood over the fallen creature, breathing hard but victorious. In the darkness, he could scarcely believe it was done. His hand still gripped the hilt of his sword, which remained embedded in the Minotaur's thick hide. Gently, he pulled it free. The sound of steel sliding from flesh was unnaturally loud in the quiet. He stepped back and took several deep breaths to steady his racing heart. His shoulder throbbed where he had been struck, and he felt a warm trickle of blood there, but it was a minor wound. He was alive, and the beast was not. In the labyrinthine corridors beyond, the echoes of that terrible fight slowly died away. Dust settled once more onto the silent stones. Outside the labyrinth, Ariadne and Phaedra had heard the monstrous roar and the sounds of battle, and then, after one final, earth-shaking bellow, all had gone quiet. They clung to each other in the darkness beside the entrance, hearts hammering, barely daring to hope. Now, as silence fell, Ariadne strained to catch any sign of Theseus's fate. The tumult that had reached them ceased abruptly after that last feral cry. Then there was nothing but silence and the soft crackle of the torches by the door. Ariadne's heart pounded. She whispered a fervent prayer to the gods that the quiet meant Theseus had triumphed, and not that he had been slain. Inside the labyrinth, Theseus knew he could not linger. He had to escape the maze before any guards discovered his absence, or the absence of his companions, and certainly before they discovered what had happened in the depths. Perhaps the Minotaur's death cry might even draw someone's attention, though he hoped the sounds had been muffled by the labyrinth's thick walls. Quickly, he felt for the thread still tied at his waist. Yes, it was there, stretched taut back the way he had come. He gathered up the slack of the thread and began to wind it around his hand as he retraced his steps. Now he moved faster than before, nearly at a jog, no longer concerned about waking the beast, for it would wake no more. At each turn and junction, he simply followed the pull of the string without hesitation. Though the route out was the same, he had taken inward in the darkness of the maze. It all looked strange and unfamiliar. Without the thread, he might have wandered lost for hours in that underground world. But the thread tugged him gently in the right direction, as if Ariadne herself were there, leading him by the hand. He thought of her waiting anxiously outside, and that gave him renewed energy. His footsteps echoed softly. He took care not to stumble or make unnecessary noise, but he did not slow down. As Theseus neared the entrance, a welcome glimmer of light appeared. The weak, flickering glow of the torches through the crack of the doorway ahead. Ariadne and Phaedra saw the silk thread quiver and begin to move, and their spirits leapt with cautious hope. Moments later, out of the darkness, a figure emerged through the door. Theseus stepped out of the labyrinth's mouth, drawing in the cool night air in a grateful gasp. Ariadne let out a soft cry of relief when she saw him alive, his silhouette framed by torchlight. He was dust-covered and streaked with a little blood, and he was breathing hard, but his eye shone with triumph. For a heartbeat, Ariadne and Theseus simply looked at one another in gratitude and amazement. Then, mindful of their urgent situation, Theseus quietly told them that it was done. The Minotaur was no more. Ariadne clapped her hands over her mouth, tears of joy springing to her eyes. Phaedra closed her eyes and murmured a quick prayer of thanks to the gods. There was no time for celebration, however. Theseus quickly gathered up the remaining length of thread, determined not to leave any trace of their escape. He also knew that they all must flee at once before the king's guards discovered what had happened in the night. The Athenian youths, who had been waiting nervously a little way off in the shadows of the courtyard, now stepped forward as they realized Theseus had returned victorious. They had heard the Minotaur's roar and feared the worst, but seeing Theseus emerge whole and triumphant gave them a surge of elation. He motioned for them to remain quiet, but smiled in reassurance. In hushed tones, he informed everyone that the Minotaur was dead and that they must hurry to the ship before alarm was raised. Ariadne and Phaedra led the way through the palace grounds, choosing side paths and lesser-used courtyards to avoid encountering the king's guards. The sky was beginning to pale ever so slightly in the east. dawn was not far off, and with it would come awakening servants and the changing of the watch. The group's footsteps were soft as they rushed toward the harbor. Each of the youths felt a mix of weariness and exhilaration. The nightmare was over, but the danger would not truly be gone until they were safely away from Crete. They reached the docks where the black-sailed ship from Athens was still tied up. It bobbed gently in the pre-dawn darkness. Only a single dozing guard stood watch by the gangplank, unaware that anything was amiss this night. Theseus, moving like a cat in the night, crept behind the guard and swiftly, but as gently as possible, struck him at the base of the neck with the pommel of his sword. The guard crumpled silently to the ground, and Theseus caught him to lay him quietly aside. He had no wish to kill the man if it could be avoided. No more blood than necessary would be shed this night. One by one, the Athenian youths climbed aboard the ship, helping each other over the rail in their haste. They moved quickly, but without panic, the calm leadership of Theseus containing their excitement. Ariadne and Phaedra were the last to board, hesitating only to cast a final glance back at the palace that had been their home. It was still dark and mostly silent, the windows blank, no alarm raised yet. Ariadne took a deep breath, squeezed Phaedra's hand, and together they stepped onto the ship to join Theseus and the others. With everyone aboard, Theseus and a few of the older youths unfurled the ship's sail, while the others took up oars and pushed off from the dock. They worked with urgency, but also with stealth. There was no shouting of commands, only whispers and gestures in the dark. The sea welcomed them with gentle waves. As the ship glided out of the harbor, the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon with pale gold and pink. The stars were slowly fading overhead. They had slipped away just in time. Just as the ship was gaining distance, a commotion began to stir on the Cretan shore behind them. The changing of the guard at the palace had revealed the empty dungeon, and soon after, the horrifying discovery of the lifeless Minotaur deep in the labyrinth. Torches flared to life all over the palace grounds and along the walls. Distant shouts carried across the water. King Minos' men had sounded the alarm. Moments later, figures swarmed the docks, and a horn's deep blare of warning issued across the pre-dawn calm. King Minos himself, upon being told that his prized monster was slain and the prisoners gone, was said to have flown into a terrible fury. By the time the Cretans began readying a ship to pursue, however, Theseus's vessel had caught the morning wind. The black sail was unfurled against the brightening sky, and the ship cut through the waters with increasing speed. The youths rowed in shifts, adding to the momentum. Soon, the distance was too great for any arrow to reach them, and the cliffs of Crete began to recede. If King Minos shouted curses or commands from the shore, they were lost in the vast open air and the growing light of day. Relief began to wash over everyone aboard as they left Crete behind. By the time the sun rose fully, Crete was a distant outline behind them, soon to vanish entirely beyond the horizon. They had done it. Against all odds, they were free. A few of the rescued Athenian girls, hardly able to believe their fortune, began to quietly sob tears of happiness as they embraced one another. The young men beamed with tired grins, some clasping Theseus on the back in gratitude and awe. Theseus himself finally allowed his tensed shoulders to relax a little. He stood at the helm, guiding the ship westward toward home, but his eyes were on Ariadne, who stood by the mast. In the new morning light, he could see how tired she was, and yet how her face glowed with a gentle joy now that their daring escape had succeeded. For a moment, the two of them simply gazed at each other, sharing a profound sense of accomplishment and relief. Then Theseus approached her and in a soft voice thanked her, for none of this would have been possible without her courage and kindness. Ariadne blushed and smiled. In her eyes shone a mix of happiness and something deeper, the beginnings of love and admiration for the hero she had helped. Phaedra joined them, and Theseus thanked her as well. He promised both sisters that they would be safe and honored in Athens. He knew King Aegeus, once he learned how they saved his son, would welcome them as family. The ship sailed on through the morning, leaving Crete as only a distant memory on the horizon. The sea was calm, almost unusually so, as if Poseidon himself had calmed the waters in acknowledgement of Theseus's victory. Now that the adrenaline of the night had faded, weariness crept into every limb. They had rowed and labored strenuously to escape swiftly, and many had gone without real sleep through the night's ordeal. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the deck, one by one, the survivors found spots to sit or lie down. Some nibbled on dry bread and figs from the ship's stores and passed skins of fresh water around, quenching their thirst under the golden sky. Overcome by exhaustion, a few of the youngest curled up in the shade of barrels and fell into a deep slumber, lulled by the gentle rocking of the boat. Their nightmares were replaced by hopeful dreams at last. Phaedra tended to a small cut on one boy's forehead with a strip of cloth and clean water, motherly in her care, despite her own fatigue. Ariadne sat with Theseus near the stern, where he held the rudder. He had insisted on steering, allowing others to rest, but Ariadne would not let him shoulder all responsibility alone. They talked softly, their voices mingling with the sound of waves against the hull. In those gentle hours after their escape, Theseus and Ariadne found comfort in each other's company. They spoke of their childhoods and of dreams they once had. Ariadne confided that she had often felt lonely in her father's palace, troubled by the dark secret beneath it and by the fear that the Minotaur cast over the land. Theseus shared a few tales of his earlier adventures in the hills of Greece, how he had dealt with bandits and wild creatures preying on travelers, as if all his life had been preparing him for this very destiny. Every so often, their conversation lapsed into a comfortable silence. Ariadne watched the sunlight dance on the water and felt that everything seemed new and bright. She knew there would be challenges ahead: her father's anger, life in a strange new city. But in that moment, she felt safe and at peace, sailing on the open sea with Theseus by her side. As day drifted into afternoon and then into a soft-painted evening, the ship continued its steady voyage northwards. By nightfall of that day, the company had recovered enough to smile and even sing a quiet song or two in thanks to the gods. A gentle breeze pushed them along under a sky now turning orange and purple with the sunset. In their relief, they had forgotten to change the sail from black to white. Indeed, in the flurry of events and the deep need for rest, Theseus had not yet thought of it. All minds were focused on recovery and the joy of being alive. That night, they anchored in a sheltered cove of a green, uninhabited island, the Island of Naxos, to replenish their water and to take a proper rest. Naxos was lush and fragrant, known for its grapevines and soft meadows. They found a quiet pebble beach where gentle waves lapped at the shore. Under a canopy of brilliant stars, the weary travelers went ashore. They lit a small campfire of driftwood, more for comfort than for warmth in the mild air, and shared a simple meal of whatever provisions remained. Laughter even fluttered among them as the tension of their ordeal gave way to relief. Ariadne walked a little apart from the others for a moment, drawn by the serene beauty of the night. The events of the past day and night swirled in her mind like a dream. Here she was, free of the shadow of the labyrinth, standing on a tranquil beach with the sound of the sea in her ears. She felt an immense gratitude and a sense of wonder. Theseus approached her, noticing her quiet reflection. With a gentle smile, he asked if she was all right. Ariadne replied that she was more than all right. She was happy and relieved, and still amazed that things had truly turned out so well. Theseus expressed his own deep gratefulness to the gods and to her. They stood together for a time, in silence, watching the moon rise over the water, casting a shimmering path of silver across the calm sea. By and by, the others began drifting to sleep, lying on soft sand or in the grassy dunes just beyond the fire. Phaedra had already curled up near the fading fire, using her cloak as a blanket, with the young Athenian women nestled around her for warmth. The young men had also stretched out under the open sky, some near the securely pulled-up boat. Theseus and Ariadne, too, eventually yielded to the gentle pull of sleep. At Theseus' insistence, Ariadne took a comfortable spot on his cloak near the glowing embers of the fire, while he sat leaning against a smooth rock just a short distance away, keeping a quiet watch as her eyes closed. Under the gaze of twinkling constellations, the entire company fell into one of the most peaceful sleeps they had ever known. No longer prisoners awaiting death, they were survivors journeying home. The breeze rustled the leaves of nearby bushes like a lullaby. All around them, the night hummed with gentle life. The chirr of distant insects, the whisper of waves on the shore, the occasional hoot of an owl in the hills. Ariadne slept deeply. Exhaustion and emotional release had granted her true rest. For the first time in many years, her dreams were not haunted by a bull-headed monster or the cries of the doomed. Perhaps she dreamed of new beginnings in a hopeful future, but fate had another turn to take in the tale of Theseus and Ariadne, one that would unfold with the dawn. As the sky lightened to a pale gray, heralding the first approach of morning, a soft mist crept over the island's shore. Theseus, ever vigilant even in rest, was the first to stir awake. He rose quietly and looked around at his sleeping companions with affection. His eyes lingered on Ariadne for a moment. She looked peaceful, curled on her side, her dark hair spilling like silk across her face. He thought to himself that he must do everything in his power to ensure she found a happy life in Athens after all she had sacrificed. Remembering that they needed fresh water, Theseus decided to let everyone sleep a while longer while he set about the morning's tasks. He moved silently, gathering several empty clay jars to fill from a freshwater spring they had spotted nearby the previous evening. The morning was very still. Even the waves seemed hushed to a gentle whisper. A pale pink glow began to touch the eastern sky as the sun prepared to rise. Theseus walked up a short path toward a grove where a small spring trickled out between stones into a clear pool. He filled the jars, taking his time and enjoying the cool feel of the water on his hands and the sound of birds beginning their dawn songs in the trees. While Theseus was away from the beach and most of the others still slept, a curious thing happened. At that early hour, the god Dionysus, patron deity of Naxos and lord of festivities, happened to notice the sleeping company of mortals on his island. Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, was returning from distant travels and passed by the shore with his lively retinue of satyrs and nymphs. In the gentle half-light of dawn, Dionysus's gaze fell upon Ariadne. He was struck by her beauty and by the quiet bravery that seemed to linger about her, even in sleep. In that moment, destiny shifted. The god knew that this mortal woman was meant to be his bride, chosen by fate. It was said that in her dreams, Ariadne heard a voice calling her name, a voice melodious and kind. Her eyes fluttered open to see a vision before her. Dionysus himself, crowned with ivy leaves and wildflowers, standing at the edge of the grove. His followers lingered just behind him in the shadows, watching with gentle curiosity. Some were playful satyrs with goat legs and mischievous grins, and others were lovely nymphs with flowers twined in their hair. They danced slowly among the trees, and faint music of flutes and tambourines drifted through the dawn air. By Dionysus's side prowled a pair of graceful panthers, their usually wild nature tamed to quiet gentleness by the god's presence, their golden eyes blinking sleepily in the half-light. Ariadne sat up in astonishment, and yet she felt no fear, for the presence of the god was warm and comforting. In that hazy twilight between sleep and wakefulness, Ariadne wondered if she was still dreaming. Dionysus stepped forward with a gracious smile and spoke softly to Ariadne. He told her that he knew of her story, of how she had helped Theseus out of compassion and love. He praised her courage and her goodness. Then he gently explained that it was ordained she would not continue on to Athens with Theseus, because the gods had chosen her for a different path. This path was one where she would become his wife, a goddess by his side, and she would find eternal love and glory. Ariadne's heart was conflicted and overwhelmed. She had, in her heart, given herself to Theseus and imagined a future with him. And now here stood a god, offering her immortality and a divine love. Tears brimmed in her eyes, not entirely of sorrow, but from the weight and wonder of the choice before her. Yet, as she looked up at Dionysus, she felt a profound kindness radiating from him. A deep part of her realized that perhaps this was her true destiny, written in the stars. Legends say Dionysus placed a delicate crown upon Ariadne's head, a diadem of 7 or 9 bright stars. It glowed softly in the dawn light, each point twinkling like a tiny sun. This was his promise to her, a sign of the immortal life he offered. He vowed that she would never be forgotten, and that their love would shine among the stars. Moved and enchanted, Ariadne slowly nodded. She understood then that she would remain on Naxos and become the bride of Dionysus. Around this time, Theseus was returning down the path, carrying the filled water jars back toward the beach. He was surprised to see, from a distance, an unusual scene near the campsite. What looked like figures dancing and the faint sound of distant music. Alarmed and perplexed, he hurried his pace. By the time he stepped out of the trees onto the beach, the vision had faded. Dionysus and his mystical retinue had vanished into the forests as swiftly as they had appeared, and Ariadne was left standing at the water's edge, gazing toward the grove where the last traces of the divine presence had disappeared. Theseus set down the jars and ran to Ariadne, concern etched on his face. she turned to him with tears sparkling on her cheeks, the starry crown still resting in her hair, gently glowing even in the morning light. Gently, she explained to Theseus what had passed, that Dionysus had appeared and claimed her as his own, and that she felt she must heed the will of the gods by staying behind. Theseus felt a pang of sorrow and disbelief. He cared deeply for Ariadne, and the thought of leaving her behind pained him greatly. Yet he also saw the celestial crown upon her brow and realized this was a sign of the gods' decree. Heavy-hearted but respectful of Dionysus's claim, Theseus understood that Ariadne's fate was not to travel on to Athens with him after all. They embraced one last time on that beach, softly and tenderly, filled with gratitude for each other. Theseus thanked Ariadne for the immeasurable gift of life and victory she had given him and his people. Ariadne told Theseus to go forth and live a full and happy life, and not to grieve for her, for she sensed she was moving on to a strange and wonderful new chapter. Their parting was gentle. It was not a betrayal or abandonment, but a bittersweet redirection by the hands of the gods. By now, the other youths had awakened and gathered, astonished at what was transpiring. Phaedra was heartbroken that her sister would be left behind, but Ariadne reassured her that this was a great honor and a cause for joy, not sorrow. Phaedra reluctantly accepted that Ariadne must stay, and the sisters shared a tearful but loving farewell. Ariadne entrusted Phaedra to Theseus's care, and Theseus vowed that Phaedra would be safe and welcomed in Athens. She would be as a sister to him, as Ariadne might have been. The sun was peeking over the horizon now, and the time to depart grew pressing. Theseus and the others needed to sail on with the morning tide. In a bittersweet parting, Ariadne stood on the shore, her slender figure gilded by the early sunlight, and waved to them, the sparkling star crown still on her brow. The survivors boarded the ship once more, this time with one fewer passenger than they had expected. As the ship pulled away from Naxos, Ariadne grew smaller in the distance, standing at the water's edge with one hand raised in farewell until she was a mere dot on the shore. Theseus watched until he could no longer distinguish her form. His throat tightened with emotion, but as he turned his face to the morning sky, he saw a new bright cluster of stars glinting faintly in the daylight, just above the island. It was Ariadne's crown, lifted to the heavens by Dionysus, placed among the stars as an eternal reminder of her. Theseus took it as a sign that Ariadne was not lost or abandoned, but rather elevated to a glorious destiny. This understanding soothed the ache in his heart somewhat. Setting his jaw with resolve, Theseus turned forward once more, toward the open sea and toward home. He was determined to bring the remaining youths and Phaedra safely back to Athens, and to announce to all the end of King Minos' cruel tribute. The ship sailed swiftly now, aided by favorable winds, as if the gods themselves were speeding them along. Perhaps Poseidon, proud of his son's courageous feat, blew kindly on their sail. Perhaps Athena, pleased with his wisdom and bravery, guided their course. Several days passed on the journey from Naxos to Athens. The mood aboard was quieter now, thoughtful and muted. The youths often spoke in low tones of what they would do once reunited with their families, of the joy that would fill the streets of Athens when they arrived. They also spoke in reverent tones of Ariadne's fate, marveling at how the gods had stepped into their story. Phaedra remained frequently at Theseus' side. They comforted each other in their shared worry for Ariadne and hope that she was happy with Dionysus. Phaedra was a gentle soul, and as the days went by, Theseus grew fond of her as well, seeing in her much of Ariadne's bravery and kindness. At last, on a clear afternoon, the coastline of Attica came into view. The sun was dipping low in the west, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples, when a lookout on the ship spotted the familiar shape of mountains and the glint of white buildings on the distant land. Joyous excitement gripped the young Athenians. Some laughed, some wept tears of happiness to see home after such a harrowing journey. Phaedra gently held Theseus's arm and smiled, sharing in the joyous anticipation. Theseus himself felt a swell of pride and relief. He had kept his promise. He was bringing them home. However, amid the excitement, Theseus, his heart heavy with the recent parting from Ariadne and occupied with the tasks of sailing, had forgotten one crucial instruction from his father. High on the mast, the sail that stretched out was still the somber black one, left unchanged from when they fled Crete. In the flurry of events, the battle, the escape, Ariadne's departure, he had not thought to raise the white sail of victory. And now, as the ship rounded the cape toward the Bay of Athens, that black sail billowed ominously against the bright evening sky. On the cliffs of Sunion, overlooking the sea near Athens, old King Aegeus kept his ceaseless vigil. Every single day since Theseus had left, the king had climbed a rocky outcrop at dawn and stared out over the waves until dusk, hoping to see a ship returning with a white sail. His hair had grown wild in the salt wind, and his eyes were tired and hollow from lack of sleep and constant worry. The people of Athens left him undisturbed in these lonely watches. They shared his anxiety, but none could comfort him. On this day, as the sun was about to set, King Aegeus's heart leapt when he spied a dark speck on the horizon, slowly taking shape as a familiar ship. He strained his eyes, shading them with a trembling hand against the golden light, and indeed, he recognized the vessel as the very one he had sent out with the tributes. For one sweet moment, hope soared in his chest. His son's ship was coming back. But as the ship drew nearer in the sunset glow, Aegeus's keen gaze perceived the color of its sail. Black. The sail was black. The old king's heart shattered. In that instant, he was certain that his beloved son had perished. Perhaps Theseus had died in the labyrinth along with the others, and now the ship returned either empty or with only survivors bearing tragic news. All the promises and hopes Aegeus had clung to were undone by that single dark sail. Overwhelmed by grief and despair, Aegeus felt he had nothing left to live for. With tears flowing down his lined cheeks, King Aegeus whispered a final goodbye to the world he had loved. As the first stars of evening blinked into the sky, the bereaved father stepped forward from his lookout and cast himself off the edge of the cliff into the sea far below. The waves were gentle, almost tender, as they received him. In the quiet embrace of the water, the life of the sorrowing king slipped away, his spirit carried off, perhaps, by Poseidon's mercy to a more peaceful realm. Moments later, Theseus' ship entered the harbor of Athens. The people on the docks recognized the vessel and saw the black sail. A great cry went up, and soon word raced through the city that the mission had failed and the prince was dead. However, when the ship finally moored and the young Athenians began to disembark, the onlookers gasped, first in shock, then in utter joy. They saw their children stepping off the ship alive and well. Each of the youth who had been sent away had returned, save one unfamiliar young woman in their midst, the Princess Phaedra from Crete. For a moment, those gathered stood frozen in disbelief. Then, with sudden jubilation, mothers and fathers rushed forward. Tearful laughter and cries of joy rose into the air as families were reunited in tight, loving embraces. People called out names, sobbing with relief as they touched sons and daughters they never thought to see again. In the midst of this elation, Theseus himself, weary but triumphant, came down the gangplank. There were moments of confusion amidst the joy, the exuberant cheers for Theseus' success, intermingled with perplexed murmurs about why the sail had been black. As Theseus stepped onto the dock, basking in the overwhelming happiness of his people, a realization like a dagger struck him. He had forgotten to change the sail. His stomach dropped. Without a word, he broke away from the celebrating crowd and scanned around desperately for his father. A few concerned voices fell quiet as they saw the prince's expression change. Someone pointed toward the sea, toward the cliffs beyond the harbor, and Theseus felt dread grip his heart. He pushed through the throng, Phaedra following anxiously at his heels, and ran along the shore toward the foot of the high cliff where his father had kept watch every day. There, washing back and forth in the gentle surf, he found what he feared most: King Aegeus's royal cloak, floating torn and empty. The old king was nowhere to be seen. only the endless rolling waves and the empty sky above. With a broken cry of anguish, Theseus realized that his father had thrown himself into the sea, unable to bear the thought of his loss. He fell to his knees on the wet sand, clutching his father's sodden cloak to his chest. Never had he felt such piercing sorrow. In his moment of greatest victory, fate had dealt him a cruel blow of personal tragedy. The joyful celebration in Athens turned swiftly to mourning. Theseus, though hailed as a hero and the savior of his people, was stricken with grief at his father's death and haunted by the simple mistake of the sails. He tore down the black sail at the harbor, cursing it, but no act could undo what had happened. The Athenian people, sharing in his grief, yet still profoundly grateful that their children had returned alive, comforted their new young king as best they could. King Aegeus's body was later found and retrieved from the waters. The Athenians held a solemn funeral for him, full of love and honor for the devoted father and king who had waited day and night for his son. They laid Aegeus to rest with all dignity, and the stretch of sea into which he had fallen was thereafter forever known as the Aegean Sea, in memory of that heartbroken father. Thus, in bittersweet fashion, Theseus's homecoming was both a triumph and a tragedy. He had saved countless lives and ended the horrific tribute that had plagued Athens, but the victory was tempered by personal loss. In time, Theseus was crowned king of Athens. He found comfort in the gentle presence of Princess Phaedra, and eventually he took her as his wife, strengthening the bond between Athens and Crete, not through fear and violence, but through compassion and love. King Minos, far away in Crete, raged when he learned of the death of his monster and the flight of his daughters, but with the Minotaur gone and his own family diminished, he did not trouble Athens again in the same way. Daedalus, who had aided Ariadne and indirectly Theseus, was imprisoned by Minos for a time, but eventually made a daring escape with his son, flying on wings of wax and feathered to freedom. But that is another tale for another night. Under King Theseus's wise and just rule, Athens prospered. He united the region of Attica under Athenian leadership and was loved by his people for his bravery and fairness. The story of his journey into the Labyrinth and the slaying of the Minotaur was told and retold for generations, a beacon of courage in dark times. And always in the telling, Ariadne's part was remembered too. The gentle princess, without whose thread of guidance and love the hero would have been lost. Many nights, King Theseus would gaze up at the stars and see the glittering crown of Ariadne shining among them, and he would offer a silent prayer of thanks, wishing her happiness in the company of the gods. The labyrinth of Crete lay silent and empty thereafter, its purpose lost. Over the years and decades, it slowly fell into ruin. Ivy crept over its stones, and its corridors echoed only with the wind. In time, the labyrinth was reclaimed by the earth, leaving behind only faint traces. The dark chapter of the Minotaur had closed. In its place lived a tale of hope, of how brave hearts and kind souls together overcame what seemed insurmountable. Now, dear listener, the journey of Theseus through the labyrinth has come to an end. The hero faced the darkness and emerged into the light. Athens is safe and at peace, and night is gentle once more. As you lie here, imagine those ancient stars above Athens, glittering kindly down. Imagine the calm sea, now called the Aegean, named for a father's love and loss, its waves whispering softly against the shore. In this peaceful moment, take a slow, deep breath and let any remaining tension melt away. Every challenge has been overcome in our tale, and now all is well. Feel the quiet of night envelop you like a warm cloak, just as the comfort of a happy ending settles in your mind. Your body is relaxed and your breathing is easy. All around, the night is still and gentle. The bed beneath you supports you softly, and your pillow cradles your head. If you listen, you may hear only the faintest hush of your own breath, like a calm tide on a shore. You have journeyed far in this story, and now it is time to rest. Let the images of ancient shores and starlit skies softly fade. Whatever thoughts come, let them drift by like gentle clouds. Know that you are safe, that you are cared for, and that sleep is here to cradle you. May the courage of Theseus, the love of Ariadne, and the wisdom of these old myths guard your dreams tonight. Now, surrender to the quiet night and drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night.